So of course you get around to doing this book. Maybe you've written the book already, you've got an idea. But what's the secret to a good book title? Because as well as the art or the photo on the cover, you need something that presumably is going to grab the audience.
Absolutely. Well, it was funny when I came up with the Robin. I came up with Robin a biography, which sounded a bit odd, but it seemed to work. Now, whether it worked because of the title, because it had a Robin on the cover, or because they produced the book very beautifully. It was small. It looked like a nice, easy to read book, which it is. The Accidental Countryside came out partly of Richard Mabey's book, The Unofficial Countryside, many years ago. And I did ask his permission, bless him, and he did say yes. And then I wrote a book on bird names, which I have here somewhere. Voila, Mrs. Moreau's Warbler, How Birds Got Their Names. And that is a very odd one, because I met the editor from Faber, and we were discussing another book idea. Nothing came of it. And we finished the meeting and she said, look, I'd really like to work with you. If you've got any other ideas. And I said, I've always wanted to write a book about bird names and how birds got their names. And she said to me, oh, that's great. What would it be called? And for a moment, I thought, oh, it will be, Avocet to Zebrafinch, or,
Yeah.
whatever. And there's a lot of books like that. And they're perfectly good books, but they are effectively dictionaries. So you look up, Avocet, and it tells you what they are. And that's great. And I wanted to write a story, a narrative, a history book. And quick as a flash, I said, I want to call it Mrs. Moreau's Warbler because I think it's the most bizarre and intriguing bird name. And I want to use that as the story. And the story is the book starts and finishes with me going on what Mrs. Moss calls a jolly to Tanzania with two friends to search for this little bird, Mrs. Moreau's Warbler, which my son George said, oh, you've done another book with a robin on the cover, Dad. It looks like a robin. It's extremely rare, and it's found on one mountain in Tanzania in the world. So we went to
Wow.
see it. And the book, and I used that because I was just fascinated at, the bizarre names that birds have.
Well, I suppose immediately you think, well, who was Mrs. Munro? There's that question, isn't there, when you see that title,
Exactly. And I did that. I did a book called Wild Hares and Hummingbirds which was subtitled The Natural History of an English Village. And it's my village in Somerset through a year. And people said to me, hummingbirds. And I went, aha, hummingbird hawk moths. But it made people think, Wild Hares and Hummingbirds, English village. Immediately you've hooked them. Sometimes you want a title like The Wren or The Robin, which really literally does what it says on the tin.
Yeah.
Other times, I suppose, I've seen books which I've been spoilt by, are not a very good title, are very good books. I won't mention any of them, but, occasionally you get a book and you think, why would they call it that? And some people might think that about Mrs. Moreau's Warbler, but I like it. And, in the end, you are writing books for an audience, but it's terrible to say, but you're sort of writing it for yourself. You've got it in you, and you want it out there.
Yeah, well, you've got to certainly at least like what you're writing and be interested in it.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got to be passionate about, you know what it's like when you give your talks. I've seen you give that fantastic talk you gave at New Networks on your passion. And if you are passionate about something, and this is particularly true about a book, people bought this book who weren't particularly interested in birds. They might have been interested in language or have a vague interest in birds or history. And people have said to me, it's not a book about birds, is it? It's a book about the history of the language and how things like the Norman conquest changed things. And that's actually what it's really about. The birds are a vehicle to do it. Some new nature writing, of course, isn't about nature at all. It's about, as someone once said, it's all about me, or as Mike Gilder famously said to me as a joke, he said, TV presenters tend to say to you, but that's enough about me, Jack. What do you think of me? And a lot of nature writing has gone down that route, and some of it is very, very good. Some of it sells very well, and a good example would be Helen Macdonald's wonderful book H is for Hawk.
Yeah,
which is of course about her and her grief and her the loss of her father, and it doesn't pretend to be anything else. So that's what it's about. But she had something important to write about. I think the danger is when people write about nature, that you should be in it because you're the observer. You should be like a sort of good radio presenter, what I call the trusted guide. You know, I want to know a little bit about you if you write about your passion. But if it's all about the author, it's like the nature's just there as a vehicle. And I think,
Yes, I see. I suppose it's getting that balance, isn't it?
yeah, and you know, a lot of things are categorized as nature writing now that you might argue aren't really their biography, their memoir, their travelogues. And that's fine. You know, it's good that there's a lot of different stuff out there. The bizarre thing is, when I was growing up, there were virtually no books of this sort. No one wrote books about our human interaction with nature. They were almost, you know, I mean, there were a few famous ones, of course, Gerald Durrell, My Family and Other Animals, but that was written before I was born. Ring of Bright Water, Gavin Maxwell and the Otters, written the year I was born. So this is a long time ago now, you know. But when I was growing up, they were the sort of books we read. We didn't read, there weren't contemporaries writing those books in a way that there are literally dozens of them now.
It definitely seems to be in vogue, if that's the right word for it. But I mean, I remember reading Butterfly Isles by Patrick Barkham. I don't know if you've read that.
I have,
And
yeah.
you know, it was the kind of crutch of him going after all the different butterflies. But then it mentioned like days out with his father, and I think even at one point it was his relationship was a bit rocky because of going after butterflies. It's not something you expect to read in this. So, but I thought he got the balance right there, because you know I'm not reading that book to find out about everything to do with Patrick, but those little hints humanize him in a way, and I think that's nice to have that in a book because you can relate to aspects of that. So
I think Patrick's books are a very good example of that. I think I really like Patrick and I really like his writing, and he comes and talks to my students and he's absolutely brilliant because he's so generous with his he shares that. He shares the process of writing. He's a very diligent writer. He's a proper journalist. You know, he interviews people and takes shorthand notes and that sort of thing. And I think you're absolutely spot on there, Jack. He has just enough of himself in his books. And I want that. I want that personal side, because why is he writing this book? Why is he on this quest to see the butterflies? Because, as he said, he's a 30-something metropolitan journalist who's lost touch with nature. But as a child, his father was very passionate and took him out to see butterflies. So that becomes part of the book. But it's not a sort of, you know, it doesn't veer into being a memoir. There's nothing wrong with being a memoir if you're writing a memoir.
yeah,
But I think what's great about Patrick's book is that it's a quest. It's a bloody good quest. You want him to succeed. You don't know if he's going to, and you know, I won't give it away, but it's got a, you know, it's a very satisfying book. And he's also, you know, he's a really fluent writer. You can read Patrick. He's not. A woman came up to me once and she gave me the best compliment I've ever had. She said, "Oh, I really enjoyed your book about your village. It was so easy to read." And then she stopped, terribly flustered and embarrassed, and said, "Oh no, I'm sorry. That's obviously the wrong thing to say to a proper writer." I said, "No, it's a lovely thing to say. You don't want to be difficult. You don't want to be unreadable. You don't want people to have to look, as they do at a lot of literary fiction and indeed some literary non-fiction. You're having to reread the sentences because you don't quite understand what they mean." Well, you know, if you're having to use a dictionary to read a book, if you don't understand what the author's getting at, then you're in trouble. And most great nature writers, Mark Cocker, Patrick Barkham, Helen Macdonald, you know, all these people, they're very readable books. They're not
yeah.
books that you have to struggle to understand.